The jet plummeted, a shattered ghost against the sun. Below, a desert runway blurred with emergency lights. Inside, an instructor's blood-soaked hand gripped the controls, her voice a lifeline to a panicked student. One wrong move, and this training flight would become a grave. Would you trust that quiet voice to guide you through absolute chaos? The desert dawn at Ironwood Air Base didn't gently ease in. It slammed down with searing heat and the distant metallic shriek of jet engines warming up. Concrete expanses shimmered, reflecting a pale, unrelenting glare as a new day's sorties prepared for takeoff. This was the crucible where promising young pilots either forged themselves or broke. Among the ground crews and bustling figures, Captain Anya Petrova moved with the quiet precision of a shadow. Her flight suit, faded at the seams, bore the subtle scars of countless hours in the cockpit. No swagger, no loud pronouncements, just a calm stillness in her eyes that spoke of decisions made in fractions of a second, in environments where mistakes were measured in grave outcomes. But not everyone saw the quiet strength. Near a hangar, two junior instructors, mugs clutched in their hands, watched Petrova approach the waiting Stryker T-10 trainer. "Command must be getting desperate," one muttered, a smirk creasing his lips, "putting someone that *quiet* in the lead." The other chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. Million-credit jets, handed to instructors who look more at home behind a desk pushing paperwork. Petrova walked past them, her gaze unwavering. The casual disrespect was a constant, low hum beneath the roar of the jets, a challenge she carried silently, her jaw subtly set, a testament to battles fought and won where words held no sway. Lieutenant Elias Vance, on the other hand, was all sharp angles and barely contained nervous energy. His academic record glittered, his simulator scores were flawless, but a real Stryker T-10, hundreds of feet above the earth, was no simulator. The air had a brutal honesty no algorithm could replicate. Vance stood beside the sleek silver airframe, his checklist binder gripped so tightly his knuckles shone white against the dark fabric of his flight gloves. This was his final qualification flight. His future, his entire career in the Republic's air arm hung in the balance, a fragile thread stretched taut. Inside the operations building, the filtered light did little to ease the tension in Vance's posture. Petrova reviewed his file. *strong situational awareness. Solid instrument work. Hesitation under pressure. The words echoed like a death knell in the quiet room. She closed the binder gently, then walked out to meet him. "Morning, Lieutenant," she said calmly. Her voice was steady, a balm against the storm brewing within Vance. His answers during the pre-flight briefing were technically correct, but the slight tremor in his hands, the barely perceptible catch in his breath, spoke volumes. He knew the procedures. Did he trust them? Did he trust himself? The Stryker T-10 shuddered, then lunged forward, engines roaring a symphony of raw power against the concrete. In moments, the desert floor became a patchwork beneath them, shrinking with alarming speed. Vance, in the front seat, found a rhythm. His hands, initially stiff on the controls, began to flow with the movements of the jet. Petrova, observing from the rear cockpit, noted the subtle easing of his shoulders. The vast, blue expanse of Eridor's sky offered no judgment, only unforgiving physics. "Maintain your climb rate. Watch your airspeed." Petrova's voice was a constant, calm presence, a quiet pulse in the frantic beat of the jet. The first maneuvers were textbook. A steep bank, slicing through the air like a silver blade against the horizon. Altitude control, smooth and precise. Vance relaxed, a fragile confidence blooming under the steady hum of the engines. But then came the formation approach simulation, a test of precision and mental agility under pressure. Small errors began to creep in. A momentary drift, a slight overcorrection, then another. Each imperfection, amplified by the high stakes of the qualification flight, stung Vance like a lash. Petrova's voice remained even. "Ease your correction. Don't chase the instruments." The air was thinner up here, but the pressure in the cockpit thickened with every passing minute. Think about the silent burden of observation, of knowing a flaw could unravel everything. Far below, the control tower monitored the training pattern. In the operations building, instructors watched through binoculars, the small silver jet a distant, shimmering point against the blue. "That Vance kid looks tight on the controls," one murmured, shaking his head. "Morgan's with him," another replied, lowering his binoculars slightly. "She'll keep him steady." High above, the aircraft continued its sequence. Petrova checked the time. "Next exercise," she announced, her voice a calm harbinger of what was to come. "Emergency approach simulation." Vance acknowledged, his breath catching. This was the final, most demanding test of the flight. He reduced throttle, initiating the descent, lining up with the unseen corridor back to Ironwood Air Base. Everything appeared textbook. For a moment, the jet settling into its approach path. Then, with the force of a thunderclap, a violent, tearing crack ripped through the cockpit. The entire Stryker T-10 shuddered, rattling its frame with bone-jarring force. What was that? The question hung heavy in the suddenly silent air as cracks began to spiderweb across the canopy, turning their clear view into a shattered mosaic. The impact was instantaneous, brutal. A large bird, a mere blur of feathers and bone, had slammed into the canopy at closing speeds approaching supersonic. The crack was not just a sound, it was a physical blow, reverberating through the entire airframe, through the very bones of the pilots. One moment, a clear blue sky. The next, a chaotic spiderweb of fractured plexiglass. Wind, an unseen, screaming entity, tore at the shattered surface, whistling through newly formed gaps. Sunlight, once a steady presence, now fractured into 1,000 splintered spears, stabbing at their eyes. Lieutenant Vance froze. His hands, which moments before had moved with tentative confidence, locked onto the control stick, paralyzed. "What was that?" His voice, usually steady, was now a raw, choked gasp in the intercom. The nose of the Stryker T-10, stripped of his guidance, began to drift, veering off the precise approach path it had held seconds earlier. The aircraft wobbled, a sudden, alarming shudder threatening to throw them entirely off course. Panic, a cold, visceral dread began to claw at Vance's throat, stealing his breath, blurring his vision. Captain Petrova's response was immediate, almost preternatural. Her hands, fueled by thousands of hours of instinctual reaction, moved with a controlled ferocity. "Stay with the checklist. I've got the aircraft." Her voice, though urgent, was utterly devoid of the panic that gripped Vance. From the rear cockpit, she took control, overriding his frozen grip, smoothly but firmly guiding the controls. The jet, which had threatened to tumble into an uncontrolled descent, responded, its wings leveling, the nose settling back onto its approach. The engines, mercifully, continued their steady roar, a reassuring pulse against the jarring vibrations from the damaged canopy. Wind now screamed through the growing fissures in the plexiglass, a high-pitched metallic shriek that pierced the engine noise. Cracks, like veins of ice, spread across the canopy, making the entire structure shimmer under the relentless sun. Petrova's eyes, scanning the damage, registered the structural integrity holding, but just barely. A small, ragged shard of glass, torn free by the impact, had whipped backward, slicing through the reinforced fabric of her right flight glove. A dull sting bloomed across her palm. She flexed her fingers once, a brief, involuntary wince, but the aircraft was still thousands of feet above the ground, and the frightened student in front of her needed a rock, not a casualty. The cut was small, but blood, dark and warm, began to seep slowly through the material, blooming into an ominous stain. "Ma'am?" Vance's voice, though steadier, still trembled. He was looking at the canopy, his eyes wide, captivated by the spectacle of imminent failure. Petrova's response was sharp, decisive. "Focus on the checklist, Lieutenant. We're still flying." It was a command, a lifeline. The raw reality of their situation, a crippled jet, a panicked student, an unseen injury, settled heavy in the small, vibrating cockpit. They were alone in this. No help could reach them up here. Below, on the sprawling concrete ribbons of Ironwood Air Base, a different kind of chaos was unfolding. The control tower, monitoring the training pattern, registered the Stryker T-10's sudden, erratic movements. "Training aircraft, confirm status." The radio crackled, the urgency in the controller's voice a stark contrast to the routine chatter of moments before. Observers on the ground, accustomed to the elegant arcs of training jets, now watched with growing alarm as the silver dart in the sky seemed to fight an unseen enemy. Petrova, battling the growing pain in her hand, the metallic taste of adrenaline in her mouth, kept her voice even, a controlled balm for Vance's fraying nerves. What would you do in that moment? With blood seeping from your hand, would you have the composure to project absolute calm? She knew that fear was a virus, more dangerous than any mechanical failure. Vance, still staring at the fractured canopy, was teetering on the edge of that infection. "Run the checklist," she ordered, her tone quiet but firm, overriding the screams of wind and splintering glass. Vance, struggling for purchase in the swirling chaos, forced his eyes back to the instrument panel. His breathing was shallow, ragged at first, but Petrova's rhythmic commands, one step at a time, slowly reeled him in. He began to read, his voice gaining a fragile cadence. Asterisk hydraulics stable, engine output normal, flight controls responsive. The aircraft was flyable. It was damaged, badly, but it was still asterisk flying asterisk. The constant, violent shuddering of the canopy was a relentless reminder of their peril. Every gust of wind seemed to push against the fractured glass, threatening to peel it away, to blind them completely. Petrova glanced at her hand again. The blood had now soaked completely through the glove, a dark, blossoming stain that hinted at the deeper wound beneath. The pain was a persistent throb, a quiet scream beneath her carefully constructed calm. She knew the risk of infection, the potential for complications, but those were distant concerns. Right now there were 2 lives in this aircraft, and one of them was relying entirely on her. She wiped her bleeding hand discreetly against the side of her flight suit, a silent, desperate effort to keep the wound hidden, to maintain the illusion of control. Far ahead, a thin gray line began to appear on the desert floor. The runway. It was miles away, across an expanse of unforgiving terrain. The control tower had already declared a full emergency. Surrounding airspace was cleared. Emergency crews, fire trucks, and medical personnel were rolling into position along the edges of the landing strip, their flashing lights an ominous, distant flicker. Inside the cockpit, the runway grew steadily larger, a fragile promise of safety. Petrova studied the fractured canopy. The cracks intensified with every passing second, growing wider, deeper. If it failed completely during the critical moments of touchdown, shards of plexiglass would explode inward, blinding them, rendering them utterly helpless. This was more than a damaged jet. It was a ticking clock. The decision had to be made. A slight adjustment to their approach profile, a fractional reduction in descent speed, anything to ease the strain on the fragile shell above them. Every choice, every micro-adjustment, carried the weight of life and death. The Stryker T-10 continued its perilous descent, thousands of feet above the unforgiving desert, its shattered canopy a testament to the sudden, brutal reality of aviation. Petrova's hand throbbed, a steady, insistent pain, but her voice remained calm, a precise instrument of control. She knew the eyes of every instructor, every crew member on Ironwood Air Base were on them, watching this damaged ghost against the blue. And she knew that one wrong move, one flicker of doubt, could turn this descent into a catastrophic final plunge. The runway stretched out before them, an impossibly distant ribbon of hope. Could she guide them there, through the chaos, through the pain, with a secret wound and a student on the brink of collapse? Could you? The jet continued to fall. The screams of the wind and the vibrations of the shattered canopy, a relentless assault on the senses. Petrova's injured hand, a source of silent agony, remained concealed. The tension in the small cockpit was a palpable entity, tightening around Vance with every foot of descent, every shudder of the crippled aircraft. The runway was closer now, but the ground was still a terrifying distance away. What decision would she make next to keep them from spiraling into the abyss? Inside the battered cockpit, Captain Petrova's voice was the only steady thing. The roar of the engines, the violent shriek of wind tearing at the fractured canopy, the continuous shuddering of the airframe, all created a maelstrom of sound and vibration. Yet her commands cut through it all, precise and unwavering. Hydraulics. Check. Engine parameters. Confirm. Flight controls. Report. Lieutenant Vance, still grappling with the sheer audacity of the chaos, felt her voice as a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink of a full-blown panic. His initial paralysis had given way to a desperate, almost robotic adherence to her instructions. His shallow, ragged breathing began to normalize, albeit slowly, as he forced his eyes onto the instrument panel, away from the terrifying web of cracks above them. The internal battle was fierce. Every cell in Vance's body screamed at him to focus on the impossible, the broken, the uncontrolled. But Petrova's voice was relentless, methodical, a hammer tapping away at the wall of his fear. "What's our airspeed, Lieutenant? Altitude, deviation from glide path?" Each question demanded an answer, a data point, a return to the rigid structure of procedure. It was a mental wrestling match, a desperate attempt to impose order on an utterly disordered reality. Could you hold a checklist in your trembling hands and believe it could save you, even as the sky itself seemed to be falling apart around you? On the sun-baked concrete of Ironwood Air Base, a grim tableau was unfolding. Fire crews, their trucks a vivid splash of red against the pale desert, were positioned along the runway. Ambulances idled, their engines a low thrum beneath the distant, urgent crackle of radio traffic. Medical teams stood ready, their faces etched with a professional stoicism that barely masked the underlying tension. Everyone scanned the sky, searching for the small, silver jet that was now a ghost in the training pattern, its emergency undeclared but undeniably real. The silence from the aircraft, broken only by Petrova's terse transmissions to Vance, amplified the dread. Petrova, however, fought a silent, solitary war. The cut on her palm, a searing line of pain, throbbed in rhythm with the jet's violent vibrations. Blood continued to seep, now a dark, sticky warmth against her skin, clinging to the frayed edges of the glove. Each flex of her fingers sent a fresh wave of agony up her arm. She glanced at the spreading cracks in the canopy. The plexiglass seemed to groan under the strain. A complete failure, at their current speed and altitude, would turn the cockpit into a lethal confetti of razor-sharp shards. It wasn't just her life, it was Vance's. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, a physical pressure more intense than any G-force. She was not just an instructor. She was a shield, a last line of defense against the unforgiving laws of physics and the brutal randomness of fate. The aircraft continued its descent, an increasingly unstable bullet aimed at the distant runway. "Altitude, Lieutenant?" Petrova prompted, her voice tight but controlled. Vance's report was strained but accurate. He was still with her, still responding. That was the most critical victory. Petrova, however, felt a wave of dizziness, a momentary blur at the edges of her vision. Blood loss, however minor, combined with adrenaline and the physical demands of controlling a damaged jet, was taking its toll. She pressed her thumb hard into her palm, trying to stem the flow, to dull the pain, to regain focus. The irony was not lost on her. She had to protect her student from the visible threat outside, and from the invisible battle raging within her own body. How much personal sacrifice would you endure to protect someone else, especially when that sacrifice must remain invisible? The ground personnel, their binoculars pressed to their eyes, could only guess at the horrors unfolding thousands of feet above. The jet's approach was unusual, slightly off, demanding constant, minute corrections. They saw the glint of sunlight off the canopy, but the full extent of the damage remained a terrifying mystery. Whispers circulated among the instructors. "Bird strike," they're saying. "At that speed." The implications were dire. A direct hit on the canopy at high velocity was almost always catastrophic. The fact that the jet was still flying, still descending, spoke volumes about the skill of the pilot in command. But which one? Inside the cockpit, the air grew heavy with the smell of ozone and wet earth, mingling with the faint, coppery tang of Petrova's blood. Vance, hyper-focused on the instrument panel, was finally finding a rhythm, his hands moving with renewed, if still tense, purpose. But the canopy above them was deteriorating. With every foot of altitude lost, the external air pressure increased, testing the shattered plexiglass to its breaking point. The cracks seemed to deepen, to multiply, extending like grasping fingers across their view. The violent shuddering intensified, each vibration sending a fresh jolt of pain through Petrova's hand. "Maintain your speed," Petrova commanded, a fractional tremor in her voice she immediately suppressed. Vance, locked onto the glide path indicator, made a minor adjustment. He was flying the plane now, truly flying it, guided by the silent, steady will of the instructor behind him. But the sheer terror of the situation, the proximity of the ground rushing up to meet them, was still a palpable force. His breath hitched in his throat. As the Stryker T-10 dipped below 1,000 feet, the wind, no longer just whistling, now howled through the fractured canopy, a deafening, predatory sound. The entire structure rattled with an intensity that suggested imminent collapse. The spiderweb fractures shimmered under the direct glare of the sun, a kaleidoscope of danger. Lieutenant Vance, his eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching runway threshold, felt a fresh wave of fear ripple through him. In that terrifying instant, just as his concentration wavered, his eyes darted upward, following a particularly vicious gust of wind. His gaze, drawn by the frantic movement of the canopy, dropped down, and for the first time, he saw it. A faint, dark, blossoming stain, seeping irrevocably through the fabric of Captain Petrova's flight glove, clinging to the lower edge of the instrument panel. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The dark stain on Captain Petrova's glove was a jolt, a physical shock to Lieutenant Vance that momentarily eclipsed the shrieking wind and the shuddering airframe. His eyes widened, fixing on the crimson splotch blooming on the worn fabric. "Ma'am, your hand!" The words burst from him, an involuntary gasp of realization and alarm. In that split second, his focus splintered. The aircraft, now a mere few hundred feet above the desert floor, veered half a degree off the center line, a perilous deviation at this critical stage of landing. The glide path, so carefully maintained, threatened to unravel. Petrova's voice, sharp but still devoid of panic, cut through his distraction. "Eyes on the runway, Lieutenant!" Her tone, firm and absolute, slammed him back into the present, back to the immediate, overwhelming task at hand. There was no room for concern, no time for questions. Only the landing mattered. Almost instinctively, her injured hand moved, a phantom limb reaching forward from the rear cockpit. She laid it lightly over the control stick, a whisper of pressure, just enough to guide the aircraft back onto the proper descent line. The gesture was so subtle, so practiced, that the Stryker T-10 barely registered the correction, its nose settling smoothly back into alignment. Blood, however, continued its slow, silent journey from beneath the torn glove, leaving a faint, dark smear on the lower edge of the instrument panel. Vance saw it. He couldn't unsee it. But the sheer authority in Petrova's voice, the unyielding calm she projected, forced his attention back to the rapidly approaching concrete. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady hum of the engines. The runway numbers, painted boldly on the sun-bleached asphalt, rushed closer, blurring into a single, terrifying line. Below, on Ironwood Air Base, a different scene was unfolding. Through the large observation windows of the control tower, senior instructors watched with bated breath. Binoculars pressed to their faces, they tracked the silver dart as it clawed its way through the last, most dangerous phase of its descent. Sunlight, brutally bright, glinted off the fractured canopy, revealing the extent of the spiderweb cracks for the first time. "That canopy is shattered," one officer murmured, his voice hushed, the words spreading like a chill through the room. Emergency vehicles, now fully lined up on both sides of the landing strip, became a stark reminder of the potential for catastrophe. Fire crews stood ready, their faces grim. Medical teams waited, silent and prepared. The entire base held its breath, a collective pause in time as the damaged jet, carrying its 2 occupants and its hidden drama, descended toward them. Can true mastery be truly appreciated only when it's revealed in the crucible of crisis? Those who had dismissed Captain Petrova's quiet demeanor now found themselves witnessing an undeniable display of skill. The wind, a malevolent force, buffeted the Stryker T-10 as it dropped through 700 feet, then 500. Gusts ripped across the runway corridor, pushing against the wings, making the fragile canopy shudder with renewed violence. The rattling glass, now louder, more insistent, was a constant, terrifying symphony of impending failure. Vance's hands tightened on the controls, a desperate vice grip. For a brief second, the jet drifted half a degree off centerline again. Petrova's hand, a ghost of calm, reapplied pressure to the stick. "Trust the numbers," she said, her voice a low, steady current. "Trust the aircraft." Blood continued to flow, unnoticed by Vance, but the message, the unwavering confidence, resonated in the small, vibrating space. Petrova's instructions came in a measured cadence, a steady drumbeat in the roaring chaos. "Maintain speed. Hold your glide path. Small corrections." Each word was a building block, constructing a fragile bridge to safety. Vance, feeling the subtle, unseen corrections from the rear cockpit, slowly found his rhythm again. His breathing deepened, his movements became smoother, a symbiotic dance with the instructor behind him. The runway, a gray ribbon across the desert, became their singular focus. As the jet crossed the 300-foot mark, then 200, the runway threshold rushed beneath them. At this critical juncture, where speed and altitude must align perfectly, Vance began the landing flare. But in the final, terrifying seconds, a flicker of hesitation, a momentary overcorrection. The nose dipped lower than intended. Petrova moved. Not dramatically, not with a sudden lunge, but with the smallest, most precise application of pressure to the controls. Her experience, honed over thousands of hours, guided the aircraft, bringing it back to perfect alignment with the center line lights painted across the runway. It was a movement measured in fractions of an inch, a testament to skill that bordered on prescience. The Stryker T-10 settled. The wheels, with a firm, controlled contact, kissed the concrete. A bone-jarring shudder rippled through the airframe as the landing gear absorbed the impact. For a breath, the aircraft seemed to hover, suspended between danger and salvation. Then it continued its roll, straight down the runway. The cracked canopy, against all odds, held. Wind still tore at the fractured glass, but nothing shattered. The engines roared their defiance, then began to wind down as Vance deployed the braking sequence. The emergency crews, lining the runway, watched in silent awe as the damaged jet slowed, remaining resolutely on the center line. Inside the cockpit, Vance exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that felt like the first one in an eternity. They were safe. The aircraft, still scarred, still a testament to the brutal hand of fate, was now under control. The ground, solid and unmoving, was beneath them. But the fight wasn't truly over. The jet, a crippled bird, was still hurtling down the runway at speed, and one wrong move, one unforeseen twist could still turn this miraculous landing into a catastrophic final plunge. The Stryker T-10 rolled to a full stop at the far end of the runway, engines sighing into a low, mournful idle. The sudden, profound silence after the screaming wind and engine roar was almost deafening. It settled over the cockpit like a heavy blanket, amplifying the rapid thump of Lieutenant Vance's heart. Emergency vehicles, their flashing lights painting the fractured canopy and strobing red and blue, converged rapidly. Fire crews approached with caution, their heavy gear rustling. Ground technicians, their faces grim, moved towards the ladder beneath the cockpit. From this perspective, on solid ground, the extent of the damage was stark, undeniable. Long spiderweb cracks branched across the canopy glass like frozen lightning, emanating from a central impact point. A maintenance officer ran a gloved hand along the metal frame beneath the glass, his voice a low, disbelieving whisper. That thing held together? With a soft, mechanical hiss, the cockpit canopy lifted. Fresh, warm desert air flooded the interior. Mingling with the scent of ozone and stale adrenaline, Vance removed his helmet, his hands trembling slightly as he unclipped the harness. He felt a profound disorientation, a sense of having stepped out of one reality and into another. Behind him, Captain Petrova reached up, pulling off her own flight glove. Blood, dark and congealed, had soaked through the torn fabric, revealing a deep, ragged cut across her palm. A thin line of crimson ran down her wrist, stark against the pale skin. A senior instructor, who had climbed halfway up the ladder, froze. His eyes, initially scanning the cockpit for damage, fixed on Petrova's hand. He paused, his gaze flicking from the bleeding wound to the shattered canopy, then back to her calm, unreadable face. Recognition dawned slowly, a quiet revelation spreading across his features. He descended the ladder, turning to the other instructors gathering around the aircraft. His voice, though quiet, cut through the low murmur of conversation. That landing, he stated slowly, deliberately, that was Captain Petrova's. The conversation around the runway faded almost instantly, heads turned. Several instructors exchanged quick, meaningful glances. They had watched from the tower, seen the unusual, almost surgical precision of the damaged jet's approach. Now, the full implications settled. One instructor folded his arms, a slow nod of understanding. "Heard she handled an engine failure overseas," he murmured, his voice laced with new respect. Another, standing close by, spoke just above a whisper. "Thousands of instructor hours. Not one student accident." The whispers, the quiet acknowledgments, rippled through the gathered personnel. The same junior instructors who had scoffed hours earlier now stood in silent awe, their casual dismissiveness replaced by a profound, uncomfortable respect. The truth, witnessed in the unforgiving crucible of the sky, settled upon them. The quiet instructor they had underestimated just guided a crippled jet to safety, a panicked trainee at the controls, and she had done it without a single raised voice, without a moment of outward fear. Vance climbed slowly out of the cockpit, his legs still feeling uncertain beneath him. The adrenaline, which had carried him through the crisis, was now receding, leaving a hollow ache and a tremor in his hands. As his feet finally touched the solid concrete, he paused beside the aircraft, the fractured canopy above him glittering like shattered ice under the setting sun. His eyes, drawn by an invisible thread, found Petrova. She stood calmly on the runway, a medic gently cleaning the wound on her palm. The torn glove clutched in her other hand was a stark testament to her hidden ordeal. Vance stared at it, the realization of what she had endured, what she had hidden, crashing over him. For long seconds he could not speak, the words caught in his throat. Without her unwavering calm, without those quiet, precise corrections that had kept the aircraft steady, the damaged jet could have easily spun into disaster. A cracked canopy, shattering during touchdown, could have blinded him, disoriented him, turned the landing into a fiery nightmare. Instead, they stood on the runway, safe. His path, his career, his very life had been saved by the woman he, and others, had quietly judged. A senior officer approached Petrova, nodding with undisguised respect. "Well handled, Captain," he said. Petrova gave a small nod in return, her response simple, almost dismissive. "Lieutenant Vance kept the aircraft flying." Another instructor walked up to Vance, placing a brief, firm hand on his shoulder. "You kept the aircraft flying, son. That matters." Vance nodded, though he knew the deeper truth of what had transpired. He looked towards Petrova, who was now having a bandage wrapped around her hand. Someone else thanked her for bringing the aircraft home safely. She merely shrugged slightly. "Student did the work," she replied, her voice as calm and steady as it had been through the entire emergency. It was as if the harrowing descent had been nothing more than another routine lesson in the vast, unforgiving sky. Around them, the flight line grew quiet. Even the trainees, watching from the open hangar doors, sensed the gravity of the moment. The earlier laughter, the casual dismissals, had vanished. In their place, a silence fell, heavy with understanding and profound respect. No speeches were given, no dramatic accolades followed. But in the way the senior instructors now stood, the way the trainees watched, and the way Lieutenant Vance looked at Captain Petrova with quiet, undeniable gratitude, one thing became clear. Respect had arrived. Not through words or bravado, but through the quiet, unyielding courage witnessed in the sky. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the wide horizon of Eridor, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, Captain Anya Petrova walked slowly along the quiet edge of the runway. The distant hum of maintenance equipment was the only sound now, replacing the roar of engines. Training flights were done for the day. Most aircraft were already tucked into their hangars, their metal skins cooling under the soft glow of the evening. At the far end, beneath inspection lights, the damaged Stryker T-10 remained, a testament to the day's near tragedy. Footsteps approached from behind. Lieutenant Vance stopped a few paces away, his helmet tucked beneath his arm. The events of the flight replayed in his mind. The violent crack, the shuddering descent, the calm voice behind him, unwavering through it all. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but thick with sincerity. Petrova turned slightly, offering a small nod. No grand explanations followed, no lectures on courage or responsibility. The moment didn't need them. Above them, the sky deepened, from fading orange to the first hints of twilight blue. As the last sliver of sun vanished, the runway lights flickered on, one by one, stretching into the distance like a path of quiet stars. A lone aircraft lifted into the evening sky in the distance, its engines echoing softly, climbing towards the fading light. Petrova watched it for a moment, then turned back towards the hangar. Courage, she knew, rarely announced itself with fanfare or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it simply sat quietly in the rear cockpit of a training jet, guiding someone else through the storm, an unseen hand steadying the controls when everything else began to fall apart. The strongest pilots were not always the loudest voices on the flight line. Often they were the calmest in the air, the ones who refused to panic, who silently bore the burden of pain and responsibility. And sometimes The instructor everyone underestimated in the morning became the reason everyone walked safely away by evening. What quiet acts of courage go unnoticed every day, simply because they don't seek applause? This story reminds us that true heroism is often found in the quiet professionalism, the unwavering dedication, and the steady hands that refuse to break when chaos threatens to consume everything.